recording soon. We're live.
All right. Let's maybe share a window here and see if that works. If I can find out which window it is. This one. First order of business. I don't know if Aditya was able to join, but congratulations. I don't see him, sadly. But we is it all officially done, Cyril? I know we were in the process of it. The vote was approved.
Yeah, it is. Everything is done.
So Aditya is the first non-Grafana Loki maintainer. He's been contributing to the project for, I would say, about a year now, basically in his spare time. And over the course of that year, his contributions continue to get more and more complex and valuable. And he's demonstrated all the qualities that we like to see for someone that to be part of the team. That's very exciting. I can't thank him enough for his hard work. I'm sad he's not here though. There we go. The other stuff I have on the list, I was going to suggest a log QL demo. However, I think probably everybody here has seen it. If you would like one, the GrafanaCon talk that we did for the Loki Future has basically the same demo in it. So if you've skipped through the first 4 or 5 minutes of me talking, and then maybe another 10 minutes of Cyril talking, you get right to the demo. So, I mean, most of this stuff is stuff we talked about on the Tuesday internal call, but I listed the big items that are in progress now that we've got kind of scheduled for our internal, Q2, which I don't remember when that ends exactly. It started in May. I don't remember how long a quarter is. I should know stuff like this, right? But basically, the high-level projects are alerting, improving the BoltDB shipper, adding deletes for targeted stream deletion, improving our docs and sort of operations guides, and some amount of UI improvements. This part is still up in the air because we're going to leverage the Grafana front-end team, and it sounds like their priorities shifted a little bit recently. So the big things that we really want to see, though, are some kind of paging support to not be stuck at that 1,000 limit in Grafana. Like the user experience around what happens when you query a lot of logs right now is pretty clunky. So you get 1,000 back. It's not always clear why you get 1,000 back. The histogram doesn't necessarily reflect, the full value. There's sort of some tricky, aspects to making that work with Loki across a long time range, but I'm going to look at that. I think the UI has been updated to sort of improve that experience, but not really fix the problem. It's still only going to show you what the histogram of the results were. But some ability to say, show me more logs, right? Like click next page or something, because lots of people have given us feedback that 1,000 line limit is kind of cumbersome. It's mostly there because the UI doesn't support, like the rendering of way more than that. But we're always going to need some way to add and page through more entries. So we're hopefully going to get that. And then the other big sort of ask, this is a little bit of a stopgap until we figure out what the right long-term, the original log QL v2 goals were to include some kind of JSON parsing, but we've pulled those aside from now to scope that back down a little bit. And for now, I think we're going to look to shoot for doing like pretty printing of the JSON results, at least in Grafana, so that JSON logs can be a little bit easier to read. I talked to Gotham about this a little bit. Like, I want to investigate like the history of. Hey, Aditya. Oh, wait for him to join. Joe's exciting.
You should be
Aditya, are you there? Are you joined now?
Yeah, hi Ed. Hey, just
Oh, you
joined.
missed it. I gave you a huge congrats earlier, so I'll do it again. Congratulations on being the first non-Grafana team member for the Loki project. Thanks for all your hard work. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
That's very exciting. And then you just missed me talking about basically what the stuff we're working on right now. I didn't put the stuff that you're working on. Promtail write ahead log. Just merged the series API parallelization. That's really nice.
Yeah,
That's
I tested this yesterday in dev, and I think I did like a 6 hour query in less than 5 seconds or something like this. So it does work very well now.
yeah, that's nice. That was basically single threaded before. It's a little bit rough the way that Loki has to calculate the series. We basically have to download a chunk for each series, which is why we chose to parallelize that, because then you can make it fast the way we make other things fast in Loki. In the long term, there's probably a schema change to the index in order to optimize this a lot more, but that's not going to happen in the near future because we kind of want to limit the number of schema changes we make. We got a few other ideas in mind. So for now, though, the parallelization of that data will make that work well, which is exciting. So the series API is primarily used in Grafana when you're typing queries to give you context. So if you use a label, it will only show you values that are valid based on previous labels you've already selected. And that makes that sort of query complete a lot more useful. But you can also use it from logs CLI if you just want to query what series you have. All right, so yeah, the UI, the JSON thing, get back to where it was there. Pretty printing will help, but it ultimately, most people sort of want a way to do something like what JQ does, right? Where I can select elements out of the JSON, maybe rewrite a log line out of it. That will take a form in the future, but probably not in the next couple months. In the meantime, though, like I think I started to say that I've become curious now at the sort of the origin of JSON logging. It's kind of fun if you go sort of Google the internet for the last 5 or more years of, JSON log blog posts, because they're everywhere, right? And like everyone is advocating for JSON logging, and I'm sort of trying to understand why. I think Loki's interesting in the sense that we're not opinionated around what the log content is, and our use cases are targeted towards operators and developers, in which case JSON logging is terrible. It's totally unparsable as a human without additional tooling like what we're talking about here. But my question really becomes, what are the real use cases for JSON logs? Like, it's a little bit risky to make a campaign saying don't use JSON logs because everybody just spent a lot of years making a campaign to do so. But I'm curious now, like, what the right way to support JSON logging is with Loki. Is it tooling at query time to decompose the JSON? Is it tooling at ingestion time to decompose the JSON? Do we not decompose it at all? And that's but primarily for Loki and the use cases we target, which is ops and dev, I think JSON logging is terrible. We only have a few log streams that use JSON, and they're my least favorite to work with. And so, I think there's an interesting question there.
In my experience, I think this whole JSON stanza comes from back in the days where you needed JSON to send logs to Elasticsearch. That was the only way to actually log into Elasticsearch.
Yep.
And so if you are not doing JSON, then you will need some sort of log stash. And if you want to go with without log stash, you needed JSON logs directly.
Yeah. Yep. Another common thread that I saw in blog posts was that it's more flexible for extensibility. So if you wanted to add more log data, like another field to your logs, and you already have tooling that's sort of parsing those logs, you wouldn't break it so easily, right? So JSON you can add elements to, and generally you don't break downstream clients. almost all the threads though had this sort of feel of like, this allows you to do all kinds of crazy post-processing on your logs. And that's the question that I'm really wondering is like, do people do that? You know, like, was this mainly, you know, to support Elasticsearch, like you're saying? That's very entirely possible, right? Elasticsearch being the big open source player in logging made it very, very popular. And so I don't know, I'm curious about it, to be honest.
I think part of it is basically similar to what Loki is trying to do, but only the structured metadata stuff and not the actually being efficient part. And I think it's you could like it sounds bad to phrase it like this, but maybe it would be fair to say it's a misguided attempt to solve several things at once, and it didn't really work out. Of course, you didn't have that efficient backend which you also need, and then it's just become it's basically in between a data lake and technical depth to store it as such. But I think the thinking behind it was actually quite useful. And bit of history, initially, Prometheus exposition format was JSON as well, for as far as I remember and understand it, precisely the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
It was a attempt or an attempt to just get structured data out of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly resonated with enough people that we see it everywhere, right? Like it was enough of a good idea in principle, right?
It's the issue is like, and again, jumping over to Prometheus, one of the things which makes Prometheus nice is it's really easy to emit data which is compatible, and it's also really easy to ingest and use that data. Whereas the JSON log, it's basically really easy to create it, and then it's really hard to work with it. And I think that's is where this whole effort kind of fell short. But on the other hand, it's super simple to emit data which looks like this. So that is something which most people had down relatively quickly. But actually working with it, I don't think that really happened like beyond a few people.
Yep. So I'm looking forward to sort of kind of evolving the story around JSON. You know, we find more people, it's asked all the time, right? Lots of people have JSON logging. You know, should we encourage it? Should we discourage it? Should we stay unopinionated about it? But we need to have some solution about how to effectively deal with it, whether that's the combination of ingestion and query time tooling, or, you know, I'm obviously it probably will be both of those things, but kind of wondering if we should start, you know, like, for example, the one that we see a lot of is the event router. So was that HashiCorp's event router in Gotham? I think you originally set that up, but I can't remember.
Yes.
And that outputs in JSON, and so we have these like big JSON streams, and there's a lot of data in there, right? And like whenever I go to query those logs, I'm usually looking for specific information, right? Like when was a pod created or deleted, and I'm wondering, right, can I decompose that JSON into human readable text using Promtail pipelines? This is like 70 fields in it though, right? Like they have to be useful, I think, or not, you know. This is the trouble. It's so easy to add data to JSON that it becomes tricky to decompose it.
And as you're not ingesting it at this time, it's basically you don't feel that pain because you just generate the data and you think maybe I did something good, but you don't actually feel the pain of having this cardinality explosion. Whereas if you have a system which is geared towards actually working with it, you have this immediate control mechanism of having bad output and overdoing it, instead of just accepting that some things will be opaque and that's fine. Until period.
It's not like plain text logs escape problems, you know, like in general, I think we probably, like as a sort of logging, you know, community member, should look to see what guidance, you know, like my history with this. And I think people have similar like use cases, right? I wrote systems that did order tracking and order processing, and basically learned that, you know, I needed to have an order ID in every log line that the application wrote, or else, you know, searching the logs, and this time it was Elasticsearch, you'd be missing entries, right? So that's a case where JSON makes sense because you have an object that you can easily attach those fields to. So the same thing would apply to plain text logs. You need some way to to add context to them so that they're easier to search and filter. So yeah, I think we need to start, maybe coming up with our opinions on logging best practices, or, including JSON or without.
Yeah, I don't think we can expect everyone that is using JSON to switch, in one day
Nope.
without JSON. So I think we need to support JSON logging. And I would say that the direction we should take is not to exploit the JSON on the PromTail side. It should be probably at query time if we do that, because there's a ton of information that you don't want to remove. And if you remove it, in PromTail, then you don't have it available in Loki anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's better to crunch the data after.
Well, as an option too, right? What if you split the stream and you created a human readable version and then also stored the JSON entry? You're increasing your log volume, but
yeah.
The trouble with query time is that there's a burden around writing JQ expressions, right? Like this is the problem we're gonna fight with logql v2, which is, writing regular expressions to parse lines. So if we have a good solution for that in terms of like aliases or ways to reuse that, maybe the same thing applies to JSON query type things, and it's a non-problem at that point, right?
Yeah, most of the time the JSON is structure. So there's like a property that comes back on every line. It could be the error, but it could also be like a number. So I would expect also to be able to extract sample value from a JSON property. So there's like two cases where you want to extract data from the JSON, definitively, to be used as a query, and the other case is it's actually not readable right now. So we should cover those two, I think. We should make it readable, whether it's Grafana or Loki. Like one or the other has to handle that.
So for now, pretty printing, I think, will get us a long ways. Like that at least makes it manageable. But yeah, some level of extraction, whether it's a UI or is going to be a requirement, or going to be a necessity. Yeah, write-ahead log for PromTail. Aditya and I have been going back and forth on this a bit. I think Gotham pointed out before, conceptually, it's a bit goofy to have basically log files, which are a form of a write-ahead log, reading them and then rewriting them to a disk. There's a couple other reasons though. Like one of the reasons is PromTail does source data that's not from a file via syslog, and we will be supporting like direct ingestion via HTTP. So in those different scenarios, it makes a little more sense. But the real reason for the write-ahead log is basically kind of what Prometheus remote write has to deal with, which is, PromTail currently can send to multiple Loki servers, but the implementation of that is a bit naive and doesn't really handle what happens if one of them doesn't respond very well, so that they're not isolated properly. So if one of your Loki servers is holding a response for a long time, it affects how quickly you can send data to the other. It's effectively single threaded. Making it asynchronous creates a new problem, which is, how do you handle how do you handle the data that one of them can't receive? You have basically one pointer into the file. We've generally solved this problem by running multiple PromTail instances, and each having their own positions file and tracking that. Like that works well, but there's a fair amount of overhead there. It's not a very sort of elegant solution. So a write-ahead log will allow us to do what Prometheus does, which is, basically keep multiple pointers into it from multiple, sending clients to be able to, track how far someone has and have durability against crashing. So it would certainly need to be optional.
Why do we need the write-ahead log to have multiple pointers into a file?
Because if you're sending to multiple Loki instances, they might not all be the same.
Yep. In your tracking, in the tracking file, you just have a per remote entry.
Maybe this is just an implementation detail and I misspoke on how it works in Prometheus. I don't actually know very well. I mean, conceptually, like you're going to have a file, right, which has all the, and someone is going to be at point A and someone's going to be at point B. How that's stored, I don't necessarily care, but we would need to have a way for tracking different positions in that file or in the log, in the write-ahead log.
Which, I mean, if you open the file twice, you have two different file handles, and like I don't see why we need the write-ahead log to have multiple pointers in a file.
You're saying why we don't need the write-ahead log at all, or why we don't need?
Like, I don't see why we need a write-ahead log to achieve multiple pointers in a file. Like Prometheus tails the write-ahead log, but it doesn't use a different write-ahead log. Like,
So there would just be one write-ahead log.
About on the point is we will have one write-ahead log, but two different clients which is looking for the same values will be tailing that file and will be writing to remote.
So my question is, so let's forget we have a write-ahead log. Let's have a single file that a log stream that we are tailing. We can still achieve multiple pointers into the log stream. We don't need a write-ahead log.
Yeah, I like this idea.
Well, wait, but that doesn't help if we're not reading from a log file. And it also, the problem we have with log files is log files roll outside of our control.
Which might be a good thing. It's like because we need to roll the Prometheus like the prompt write-ahead log as well if the remote doesn't respond, and we need to build in controls and limits and all of that.
Well, we would be able to control that, right? Like we would say buffer X amount of data or X amount of time or something, right? Like we don't have any control over the files themselves. So a file can roll and that sets a point in time, which we then either need to send what's there or ultimately that file can be deleted, right? Like we don't have any.
I mean, like this again, this seems super goofy to me, and I don't see other tailing clients do this. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a hard one. And it's going to be weird for people to activate it, this feature where they're going to see the data being duplicated on disk. This is, to me, it feels weird. Like I understand the use case for things like not files, but when it comes to sending data from a file, I don't think we need a write-ahead log. If someone is really complaining about file rolling, I mean, it's up to him to not hold the file too early. He can change that. We can give some advice on how long you should wait before rolling a file. I would prefer to focus on the use case where it's not a file. You get the data from somewhere else.
I guess to me, it's no different, right? Like you solve it the same way. I mean, at least internally, the way Promptel is structured, you would solve it the same way. Not that that should drive the decision on how we do it, but the amount of work to rewrite Promptel is sort of valid there. But if we're receiving from syslog and we need to write a write-ahead log for that, like I don't see why we wouldn't take advantage of that for, I don't know. I guess you're saying it's confusing to people to have it as an option, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, the syslog use case is way better. I think it fits what you need here. Is you receive a log and it's not on disk. There's no way to get it back. So if you crash, you lost the log, and that makes sense to
well, there's another piece of this, which is we're already not durable against crashing with the current implementation. So we read from the file, and then we send that. We create a batch. The pointer is adjusted in the file before we confirm the batch is sent. So one of the reasons the write-ahead log is to, so I mean, we can, I don't know, we would have to change sort of, yeah.
We can fix that. I think write-ahead
Yeah.
log is like over-engineering that.
All right. Well, I think we need to have a bigger discussion about this. Or probably the doc where we can add our comments and feedback is really the next step, I think.
And I like to keep the idea of Promptel being a small agent also. So duplicating data on disk feels like it's going to be a pain to operate. Like it can quickly, if you have like a single node that really logs a lot, then you're going to need a very big PVC because it's double. And then it starts to be a nightmare to operate your.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely an IOPS problem, right? Like because you're duplicating an IOPS, that or doubling rather.
That's another one. So there's a lot of struggle that's going to come with the wall on as a daemon set.
One advice here from Fluent experience is that basically because you run this a serial set as daemon set, you run this on worker nodes, and people need some control on how big these buffers will become. And if these buffers get full, you need also an exception, a back-off strategy, something to signal how to work out on these things. So you need also the reverse to look in the reverse case. So if things don't go well because the store is not responding or whatever, and people need control of that, at least our experience with Fluent in OpenShift is that a lot of people ask for these features. How can I control these mini bits of Fluency to bigger buffer sizes or chunk sizes, or switch from exception strategy to drop the oldest and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought up the subject of Fluentd, because Fluentd does exactly some sort of wall, but they call it a buffer, and it can go on disk. But like Pericles is saying, you can configure the maximum byte that the buffer will handle, and above that, it will start skipping data. So maybe we should look into how Fluentd is doing this.
This was an advice and at the same time a big warning. At least from our customer cases, we can tell that it's not easy to find a good balance between the workloads, logging things on the nodes, and Fluentd logging itself by creating these buffers on the node. You need to find a balance before taking a node away because of missing space on that. And it's not easy. It's not an easy task, definitely not. That's why we until now we don't expose these things for users in cluster logging in OpenShift, but people persistently ask for these knobs. So we need a solution for Fluentd in the near future. So you may run also these issues if you have these logs on the nodes.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that and I'm forgetting his name now. There's another fellow from Red Hat that way back opened issues. Actually met him at KubeCon, where when you do disk logging, you can effectively cripple a node from all of the pods. So we actually have, with the Docker logging driver, a workaround for that now. Like you can do logging with no disk touching. But that's sort of a desired state I think we want to have support for, either through the Docker logging driver, and I don't know if Kubernetes will ever directly support this or not, but basically no disk logging, because the IO operations, like if you saturate the IO of a node, you affect every pod on that node effectively, regardless of whether they're logging or not. And there's not much you can do about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, Cryo has this kind of features, but you need to test them and figure out how things work. For example, we have this kind of strange situation where we would like to back off on this and say to the Cryo, hey, stop emitting things, so go slower. And this would, let's say, put the single container in a state like going slower. It's not really the right wording for that, but basically it's not there. So that's why we stay still with the files, and people can select between either throwing an exception and the Fluentd thread stop emitting things, so we don't eat up the inodes. And the second is drop the oldest. It's also a strategy that we tell people to use. But again, it's not easy to find the right portion and give a general advice onto that. So users will ask for customizations here or flags on prompt tail to tune this on their situation.
Gotcha. Thank you. We're out of time.
Yeah, I wanted just quickly to see, Pericles, how is it going with your experiment of running the BoldDB shipper? I think you were trying also to set up the, what's the name of it? Gossip. You wanted to use a member list. How is it going?
We're preparing our manifest currently for a first internal release against our customer 0, which is an internal customer. We have, let's say, very few volume currently on that thing, which is basically me only sending logs. So I cannot tell currently a lot of how good or how performant it is. However, I hope that I can share my experiences in the next weeks when we have the more volume of that system. So far, it looks promising because I don't see, let's say, errors in the logs or anything that goes havoc, but I don't have the volume on the traffic currently to say, let's say, we ran an issue X or Y. So stay tuned.
Cool. Yeah, keep us updated. Because you actually are ahead of us on this.
Yes, ahead is with a big question mark. The big interest into this specific area is to run without any dependency on console or ECT in environments where we don't have it on board, and so we also try to let's say to break the barrier how low cost you can run Loki. Meaning just with some computing power and some S3 storage. So this is a scenario we would like to see even for in-cluster solutions, but this is speculation currently. So, but it's a driving point, low-cost operations.
Cool, makes sense.
All right, I think we're just going to roll this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So maybe you lose a word about the performance things on BoldDB shipper you had on the agenda. Any interesting points in there? I may miss things in PRs and issues currently, so I'm a little bit behind. But so maybe you lose a word on that.
Currently. So I put performance as a question mark because we just don't know. We don't have it in a cluster yet with any real substantial volume. The chunk deduping, we have a work in place for that. So we have to change Cortex to be able to allow. So the chunk deduping work there for replication uses a cache, but it currently doesn't write the index entry when it dedupes, and we need it to write the index entry because the index is not shared in this case. Sandeep's working on a tool to do some validation of basic queries. So we'll put 2 clusters side by side, and the query T tool that we wrote for Cortex is going to get some ability to validate the responses are the same and generate some metrics on that. And so the general performance questions are going to be, so it's interesting, like the work we're doing here is very similar to what Cortex is doing with TSDB blocks and what Thanos is doing, because those are highly aligned or coupled. It's just we have a slightly different approach. So they have a per block index and we still have a sort of global index, but we're going to end up facing a lot of the same issues. Like you have to download the index to the queries. As your data set grows and grows and grows, that becomes its own thing. So, Cortex and Thanos are introducing a store gateway and levels of caching to help work with that. I expect we're going to need to go down similar roads as well. So, but this is in the probably terabyte scales, gigabyte
scales. I don't expect any performance issue on the push path. So it should be pretty much the same.
Yep.
Right. I know, our SLO is below a second per batch received.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
actually, query time performance I would expect to be the same or even potentially faster, because once the Bolt
it's
DB files are downloaded, right, like they'll be in memory, and it's questions of like when that stuff gets really big, you got to start figuring out how to shard it and how you're going to download, like the startup time of a querier if it has to go fetch index files, or at query time. I think the way it's implemented right now, or I should say I know the way it's implemented right now, is we fetch the index if we don't have it already. So there's a download time there that the querier has to pay, and then it keeps it and stores it for an amount of time. And so levels of caching there will be important. But memcache has not been a great fit for us for caching really large things. So I think we need to look at Redis probably, or something else for that, or just.
You expect on a more than double or 3-digit gigabyte scale issues on query time, right? Because you need to download all the indices that are shipped on S3 on the courier side, and then merge them and serve the queries.
Yep. So we probably are going to suggest changing to 24-hour index periods to change how this works a little, because like if you right now we have a week index by default, and so a week-long index, depending in our bigger environments, could be as much as a few gigabytes. So downloading a few gigabytes from S3 at query time is going to take many seconds. So that is a hit at the query performance. Breaking that down into smaller chunks, like 24-hour periods, means you have to download less of them. Some of this stuff will work itself out already kind of nicely with the query front end and the way queries are split. So each individual query would only be downloading or processing, a small period of time on the split. And so you get some parallelization benefits as they all sort of download queries, but there will be some changes there, right? Because it's, querying one central large store like Bigtable is going to be fast for like those long periods of time. And, when we're managing that ourselves and we have to download it or cache it or, download it and re-download it or something like that, we're going to, pay some of that. But I'm not sure how that will, that's why it's a question mark, because I don't know. I don't think it's going to be terrible, but it certainly, I'm sure it can be in some environments, right? Like in huge environments with very, very diverse query loads, you're either going to need to have queryers with a huge amount of storage for, and when I say huge, I mean, probably in the closer to like 10 or 100 terabytes a day, like where your index is going to be significant in size, right? Like our environments that are at 5 terabytes a day, the index is still, I don't know, a gigabyte a week. That's not unreasonable. And also potentially in longer retention periods, like if you had a very long retention period and you had query loads that were trying to query over very long periods, like that stuff is going to be tricky. But that's already kind of tricky now. Like that's not necessarily the use case that we've optimized well yet, which is I want to run a query over a year's worth of data. So we have problems with that already. Mostly in the sense that, there's timeouts on queries, right? Like from an implementation, Loki is more than happy to sort of just continue to parallelize and process those requests, but we don't really have a framework for submitting a job and getting an async result, which is what you would need for something that large, or paginating it or something like that, but and letting the client sort that out. But the client side part of that we're just sort of talking about now, which is, with Grafana and things, like if you make a query that times out, can we make it so that you can get basically the results that were partial results of what was returned, and then make it easy to sort of resubmit the query continuing from where you left off. I didn't write that in here because it's not really a goal, but it maybe if we can do it easy enough for the next quarter's worth of work. But so I mean, in a nutshell, I'm not expecting any significant performance problems, but we will face the reality that we're downloading the index files and merging them, and when those index files become multiple gigabytes, that time is significant, right? Like we'll have to figure out optimizations for that. Yep. So I think we're just going to roll into the bug scrub, Richie, because you said nobody else was on the other meeting, right?
Yes, I'm monitoring the other meeting. There is no one on there.
Okay.
So and just run over. But point of order before that, would it make sense to just make this call 1 hour long? Because I think we are always running over, which is good actually, because we have enough content for more than those 30 minutes. But then we should actually adapt the process to reality, not the other way around.
I will keep an hour for both of them. If there is both of them, I will keep an hour, but otherwise I think half an hour is enough. This is the first time I think we went over.
No, I'm pretty sure we ran over the last call as well. And we basically had the same thing with the same discussion about maybe it was a different community call, but I'm pretty certain. I don't think I'm pretty certain it was this one. Which again, it's a really good sign that there's enough stuff to be talked about. But then maybe we make it 3/4 of an hour, or maybe even 1 full hour.
Yeah, I'm okay with. I mean, it's only once a month, so we could definitely do.
Do we record the
I'm
bug
also fine.
scrub or not? Because
we tend not to, but I don't really care. Like it's. I can tell you what has been done before, but this is just information. I deliberately don't have an opinion on if you want to record the Loki bug scrub or not. If you want to, no worries, and I can stop the recording. I can create a new recording, and then we can even upload the correct bits.
I don't think we need a recording for the bug scrub. Am I right? Yeah.
You get consensus. You tell me what to do. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. People can watch if they want. I don't know why anybody would want to watch it, but I guess if they're curious to see. I mean, what's interesting to me about it, right, is like, I mean, we have this problem, right? Like, we have 150 open issues. This 2 or 3 times we've done this, we've started at the end with the oldest issues. That has the problem where we've talked about those issues again and again, and usually nothing has changed. We've started at the very beginning of the issues, and the problem with those is if they've not really even been triaged or looked at, many of them are not worth having an audience this large look at. So then I just clicked into the middle, and this week I'm just going to start right in the middle. Let's just pick some issues and see what we think about them, right?
How about you start at the oldest one, you work your words towards newer ones, and then you just note where you stopped, and that's where you continue next time?
Yeah, we could. Yeah. I don't remember when we started with the oldest ones I mean, it feels a bit like.
Yeah, honestly, I think maybe we should just be throwing issues like in preparation of this call, right? People should be selecting issues they want to talk about rather than trying to go through all of them.
You can do that, but that's at least not the initial intention of the bug scrubs as Prometheus team started doing them. There, the intention was really quickly iterate through all the issues, make sure they're still valid, get a really quick, lightweight consensus on to close, add tags, remove tags, maybe poke some people, whatever, and move on. Like walk through it briskly at pace, so it's reasonably clean, it's reasonably up to date, and everyone has a rough idea of what to do. If you want to do in depth, I would highly suggest doing this as a second round. But again, I don't have. Yeah, well, I just voiced an opinion and a suggestion, so yeah. I actually have an opinion here.
I think that's fine. Maybe we need to just focus on doing this quickly. I think historically you've gotten bogged down, and it hasn't proved that useful to me, at least.
So if the goal of doing them quickly is, are we just looking to close any that we don't think are valid anymore?
So at least to me, the main beauty of having a concerted bug scrub is that you get the hive mind to quickly say, is this still valid? Do we need more information? Do we want to reassign this to someone? Do we need to poke a person for more information? Maybe it's already not valid anymore because we fixed it and we just didn't update it. And the main benefit here is you have more brains. You can quickly ask others and just walk through it relatively at pace. And then you have a clean issue list, a clean bug list, and then you can work on top of that. Because there is some baseline consensus. Because you talk to other people, you don't have to think about should I be doing this or that, or maybe it's like this, because you had someone to talk to recently. and also you write this down if it's something to be written down, so everyone else knows what the others think. So to not have basically not have it rot. That's the intention behind the bug scrub initially, at least as we do it in Prometheus team.
Works for me.
So,
All right.
but
Well,
like,
I'm going to
stop
start at page
recording
6.
Okay, so I'll stop recording the community call and then I'll restart recording the bug scrub, correct? Or should I not record the bug scrub?
I mean, I feel like I don't know. I don't think anyone is going to be interested in watching it. If someone requests it.
Completely. Also fine.
Yeah.
I mean, no one is joining the bug scrub either, just as a data point. So, like, it will be the same audience anyway, and hopefully you'll be writing stuff down. Okay, so I'll stop the community recording part. Yep.
Okay. All right. Bug